Okay, take it away, Rabbi Shmuley.
All right, my dear friends. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone here on Zoom and on YouTube to another very exciting Jewish Fireside Chat. So my name is Rabbi Shmuley, as you probably guessed, and Adina and I are co-directors of the Jewish Learning Institute at Chabad of Winnipeg. And in the context of my work, I have the privilege of meeting some of the most fascinating and inspiring people, literally from all around the world. And so tonight we have the good fortune to have with us a very special guest all the way from Australia. I'm super excited. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rabbi Dr. Leibel Wolf and to Al Benarosh of Winnipeg's Jewish Child and Family Service, who is hosting tonight's webinar. Al.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's my pleasure to be here. As Rabbi Shmuley mentioned, I'm the Executive Director at Jewish Child and Family Service, and we're so proud to be able to partner with Chabad of Winnipeg and the Jewish Learning Institute on tonight's program. I'm going to introduce Rabbi Wolf to everybody, but before we do that, just a couple of housekeeping matters. Of course, we're on Zoom, so if we could ask everyone to mute their microphones, that would be excellent. There will be time for question and answer afterwards. I will be monitoring the chat. For those that are watching on YouTube, unfortunately, we won't be monitoring that chat for questions, but we are monitoring the Zoom chat for questions. So by all means, feel free to enter your questions in the chat, and we will have opportunity for a more open question and answer after the formal program. So often described as the Jewish synthesis of Deepak Chopra and Anthony Robbins, Rabbi Dr. Leibel Wolf from Australia has been a spiritual mentor and a worldwide teacher of spirituality for a generation. His expertise blends contemporary positive psychology with ancient Kabbalah to facilitate a behavioral approach to life training. Rabbi Wolf, who is university trained in law and psychology, is an unusual blend of Hasidic rabbi and universal teacher, often lecturing to Jubus in ashrams as well as synagogues and Jewish centers worldwide, addressing groups of divergent as the American Psychological Association, and the Fortune 500 convention, and Buddhist monks. He is often the keynote speaker at worldwide conferences such as the Fortune 500, the Argentinian Convention on Economy and Psycho-Spiritual Solutions, and the Galler Convention on Mind and Body Medicine. His master was and remains the revered Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zichrono Tzadik Livracha, and he has also held an extensive meeting with the Dalai Lama and has listed Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, also Zichrono Tzadik Livracha, as a good friend and colleague. As a founding lecturer in Jewish spirituality at Melbourne University in Australia, he has most recently founded Spirit Grow, the Joseph Chris Holistic Growth Center, cutting-edge personal growth training center in Australia. Rabbi Wolf's teachings utilize meditation and consciousness training to enable personal growth and emotional mastery. He has adapted deep Kabbalistic insights and teachings to provide an insightful training program with practical applications to everyday life. Rabbi Wolf has produced a much sought-after series of meditation and self-mastery audio-visual training programs, including his comprehensive life training model, Life Plan 7. Most recently, Rabbi Wolf has produced an amazing mindfulness training kit entitled Kavana Mindfulness. He is also the author of the best-selling book Practical Kabbalah and has contributed to numerous magazines and anthologies, having lectured in over 450 cities across the globe. Through his original mind yoga approach, Rabbi Wolf's audiences can master their emotions and gain empowerment in their lives. The son of Polish Holocaust survivors, he received his rabbinic ordination from the chief rabbi of Israel. Degrees in law, psychology, and comparative religions were earned in Australia, Israel, and the US. Rabbi Wolf currently lives in Melbourne, Australia with his wife Leah. Together they have 7 adult children. Rabbi Wolf, welcome, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Al and Rabbi. That was an overly generous introduction. I wish my wife were here to hear all that. She would have a much better opinion of me. Nevertheless, it's a great pleasure to be with you, and certainly to be back in Winnipeg, albeit at a distance. I have such fond memories of having visited Winnipeg a number of times, and I'm hoping that perhaps some of the people that I met previously might be in our audience today. Of course, we're living in a very different world than we did then. A world that is suffering in many, many ways. We here in Australia are probably very, very fortunate. We're an island, and we're able to maintain our integrity quite free now of COVID. In fact, right here, if there's one instance of COVID, everyone locks down. So that's the situation here. We're relatively free, thank God, after a very severe lockdown about 6 months ago that lasted for about 5-6 months. So I do understand what you are laboring under and the world is laboring under. And then we're also living in very turbulent political times in many, many respects. And even at this very moment, our own country, Eretz Yisrael, is under threat. So we have a lot of stressors existing in the world. Nevertheless, I think it's very, very important that we train for equanimity and composure, especially under these conflicting circumstances. When we use the word mastery, and specifically self-mastery, what do we mean? We understand that if we want to exercise mastery over a machine or a group of machines, we have to coordinate. Over a group of people, we have to synergize. But at the same time, self-mastery has a connotation that we have the capacity to manage internal workings of our psyche and our body. And the term self-mastery, I think, is an excellent one because it suggests that we do have the capacity to do so. It's a very inexact science in many respects, but there are even scientific elements to it as well. Let me begin by explaining to you what it is that we're exercising a management program over. Let me begin in this rather strange way. When a person dies, God forbid, is 120, we should all live to 120, 5 seconds before they die, they can hear well and they can see well. Let's assume that. 5 seconds after they die, they can neither hear or neither see. And if I were to ask you why, you would answer, well, it's obvious, they're dead. But that's not so obvious. What does it mean, dead? Physiologically, there's been no decomposition of the body, of the hearing, of the seeing in those 5 seconds. And yet the very same machinery is no longer operating. Therefore, we have to assume that something has gone missing. And it's not missing in the body. It must be something to do with the energy flow that maintains the integrity of the experience of hearing and the experience of seeing. We give a name to that energy source. We call it the neshama, loosely translated as soul. But I don't mind whatever you call it. But you must agree with me that somehow the energy has been turned off. And we don't usually think too much about that. We just accept it. But not in our spiritual teachings in Judaism. We explain through the deeper teachings of Hasidus what is the dynamics that are taking place that create consciousness. And what does consciousness mean? So when that energy flows through the physiology of the ear, we experience that consciousness as hearing. Through the eye, we experience it as seeing. We have yet another very complex piece of biological machinery called the brain. Now, the brain is not magical, it's not mystical, and it's not essentially spiritual in the sense that we're talking about. It's complex. But unless the energy flows through the brain too stops working. When it's working, we call the human experience mind, or intelligence, or intellect, or thought. English is such a flexible language that there's so many overlapping terms. In other words, consciousness means the flow of the neshama flowing through the guf, the body, the totality. That's what consciousness means. Now, you would think that that's fairly obvious, but it's not, because if you were to search the mindset of Professor Google and try to understand what consciousness is, you'd be thoroughly bamboozled by the hundreds, if not thousands, of different vantage points as to what it is. So we are a dichotomy. We are the product of spiritual flow and physical enabling processes called the body. Point number one. And don't forget that at this very, very moment, there are some trillions, I'm not exaggerating, trillions of chemical, electrostatic, and other kinds of processes taking place simultaneously in your body, all being organized by the brain, or shall I say, by the aptitude of the complex soul that flows through the brain. That's utterly amazing. And all this ceases suddenly upon what you and I call death. It's another discussion as to where does that energy go? Where does the neshama go after death? Because the neshama is not destroyed. The body decomposes, but the neshama remains intact, always was. You've been reincarnated many, many times over with that very same soul. Different bodies, different circumstances, different environments, but the same soul. But that's a segue. Let me now complicate the model a little bit more, because obviously it's been so terribly simple so far. So why don't we say something like this? When the neshama enters into the body at first instance, when does it actually affect the body? At the point of conception. Yes, that first cell. The neshama already interacts with the body, which is one cell. And then as the cells multiply, the neshama is able to express the full adult grown neshama, which it always is able to express more and more. And as the facilities of the bodies grows, more expression of that neshama. The neshama to a child upon birth flows through the mind, the brain, into the body. And here comes the first complication. It flows in two strands, two pathways. We end up calling one pathway in terms of our expression as our ego self, our sense of self, our quest for personal security, what Maslow called the quest for food, clothing, and shelter before we move to self-actualization. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. We must survive that way. And yet we call that the lower soul, or the animalistic soul, or in Hebrew, the nefesh bahamit. Why animalistic? Not because we want to put down animals, God forbid. Animals are an absolutely wondrous creation of God. But the limitation of an animal is that it's thoroughly driven instinctively. It doesn't have the human sense of intelligence, of time, present, past, and future, aspirations, hope, value systems. It's driven by an instinctive drive. We have that too, our instinctive drive for survival, security, but it becomes manifested so complex because we're human beings. So we want to survive emotionally. If someone is yelling at us, we don't like that. We need to survive that moment. So generally speaking, we yell back. We'll speak about that a bit later on as being a very, very unworthy kind of response. But nevertheless, that's exactly what we do. And yet we have another strand. Remember I said there are two strands of the neshama, of the soul? The second strand we call the nefesh elokit, our godly side, our truer self. That presents as selflessness, sharing, giving, contributing, all the elements that our value system would suggest the adjective good or the noun goodness. It's an abstract term, and we can discuss that one day as well. So we have these two tendencies, self and other. As a consequence, we are always in conflict. Yes, we always are in some stage of inner conflict with momentary resolutions of it. Shall I hit back or not? Shall I grab hold of it as I need it or leave it for the other? Are my thoughts geared to my own personal satisfaction, or are they strategizing for someone else's? Are my words empathic, sympathetic, or are they dealing with defense and security, me? And this is constantly happening, and behaviorally, of course, even more so. So we need to resolve this conflict. So in this world, where we are so threatened from the outside, whether by the plague of COVID or by the fear-laden media, and let me just spend a bit of time on that. You and I know that the media is not a beneficent educational institution. The media is a commercially exploitative mechanism with a singular goal: profits, money. It knows its psychology very well. It understands that if it can put the consumer into a state of fear, we will remain glued to the screen, whether it's a TV screen or the internet screen or what have you. And therefore, it's weighted towards sensationalism geared to fear. Therefore, skewed news reaches you. But the point being, you buy it hook, line, and sinker. And the result of that is our perception of reality is generally negative. Society's in a state of fear. Now, I am not saying that there are no dangers in the world. Of course there are. I'm not saying that COVID should be dismissed. Of course it's a potentially morbid, deadly disease. But put it into perspective, 94% of the world does not have COVID. 6% of people who have COVID die. 94%, similar statistic, don't. Now, that's not to say that you and I shouldn't take every single precaution, because the Jewish law mandates that you and I have to maintain health and integrity. Maintaining our health is as much a mitzvah as a Shabbos and Kashrus, no different. At the same time, we need to proportionalize our perception of reality. Media does us a great disservice, and therefore you and I need to be aware of that and to be able to withstand that, to be more masterful in a number of ways. Firstly, not so much media. Second, understand the media is pandering to its market segments. And thirdly, you have a mind of your own. Use it. That talking head in front of you that's creating the sensationalism of the news of today, which tomorrow will be the opposite anyway, you need to be able to see through that. So I'm just using that as an example as the fear quotient that you and I suffer under. Going on media fasts is an excellent idea. May I recommend Shabbos as being a very good beginning point. So that's one example. So we're living in a world that seems to be very threatening. How do we express self-mastery? How do we manage ourselves? So now I'm coming to yet another dichotomy: mind and emotion. I've defined mind to some extent. I said it's the way that the neshama flows through the biological engineering of brain. Emotion is not so clear to define. If I were to ask you to help me to define emotion, I'm not sure that you could put it into words. And if you did, I'm sure over half of you would speak about emotion in context of mind rather than emotion itself. And the reason why it's very hard to put into words is because words are the tool of the mind. It's not the tool of emotions. Behavior is much more the tool of emotions. Nevertheless, Chassidus teaches us, and very specifically, the major work of Chassidus authored by the Alter Rebbe, Sefer Tanya, the book of Tanya. And by the way, Tanya is not a girl's name. It happens to be an Aramaic word, which begins the whole work. It explains that mind and emotion are constantly competing for your consciousness. It's two consciousness flows. If I were to ask you, what comes first? Your thoughts or your feelings? Some of you will say, sometimes this and sometimes that. And I would answer, absolutely not. Mind always comes first. And you'll say, Label, no, you don't know me. Sometimes my emotions grab hold of me first. And I say, I may not know you, but I'm still going to maintain what I said. You can't have a feeling without some compass bearing of the mind to provide the trajectory of that feeling. You can't feel something unless there's been an interpretation beforehand. That interpretation may have lasted a microsecond because you're not being mindful, but nevertheless, and it might have been just habitual mind, which you don't even register, but it has taken place. Therefore, if we are expressing emotions of fear in our world today, the way to be able to overcome that is to develop our mindfulness. The mind shapes the emotions. Again, as the Alter Rebbe notes very clearly in Sefer Tanya, Moyach shalit al halev. The mind determines the outcomes of the emotions. The mind is able to weigh up the various factors, providing what is called in contemporary parlance, emotional intelligence. The emotions are intelligent. They're guided by intelligence, and therefore they're much more balanced. So part of self-mastery in our world today is to be able to navigate the balance of mind and emotion. And that may sometimes require a paradigm shift. So for example, reverting to an earlier example, If somebody is yelling and screaming at you, how do you respond? Well, not you, because you're obviously a very wise, balanced individual. But out there in the world, when people are yelled at, many people behave like monkeys. They copy the other one. They yell back. Oh, that's my cue line. You're yelling at me? Right, I'm going to yell back at you. And that's, of course, because we've been taught in our Western society, rather wrongly, that we have to assert ourselves. We have to express our so-called self-esteem by standing up and being firm. That may sound right, but it's not. You have to be discriminating. When someone is yelling and screaming at you, it's very, very likely that they are in pain, emotional pain or mental pain, even physical pain, complex pain. What can I do to assist them must be my default response, not yelling back. I may not be able to assist them. In fact, 95% of the time, I won't be able to assist them in the moment. But by being empathic, by demonstrating and being exemplary in my response, I'm providing an opportunity for them to learn. Whether they take it or not, that's their business. And it may be the 99th person who teaches them that finally it makes it happen. But without you being part of the chain, it won't happen. So in that moment, we have to allow our mind to interpret. They've got a problem. We have to be empathic, our higher self, our nefesh elokis. How can I assist? Rather than our lower self, nefesh bahamis, I need to secure myself. I have to yell back. Tell you a lovely little story which illustrates the point. A man is driving up a mountainside very carefully. It's like evening and the cloud is low-lying and it's very foggy and it's windy and he's taking all precautions, very slow driving. And suddenly a woman driver coming from the opposite direction cuts him off, swerves, pauses when she's next to him, rolls down her window and yells, "Pig." Well, he's not going to have a bar of that. He rolls down his window and calls back to her, "Sow," female pig, and immediately crashes into a pig. She was warning him there was a pig on the so there was a pig on the road. You see, interpretation. How do we interpret? We never know what's going on in the mind and heart of another person. Even if we know them well, there's always room for doubt. And therefore, give the benefit of the doubt. Allow your mind to act masterfully over emotions. So that was the second point that I wanted to make in context of self-mastery. There's a third point I'd like to make, and that's to do with the word stress. There are a lot of stressors out there in the world. So it seems. However, stress is not something that you catch like the cold or even like COVID, God forbid. Stress is the way you interpret and respond. Stress is of your making. Don't blame the outside world. Blame yourself. Stress is the way I choose to interpret. And if I interpret the way the media wants me to interpret, that sometimes others want me to interpret, I will stress myself out. I will stress myself out. You don't make it happen to me. I make it happen all on my lonesome. My interpretation. There's a wonderful book by a writer. Some of you may have read it. It's by Edith Eger, E-G-E-R, a Holocaust survivor who survived the Holocaust, went to America, became a psychoanalyst, psychologist, very wonderful lady, actually studied under Viktor Frankl as well. And she writes in her book called The Choice. She's written another book as well, but The Choice is the one I would advocate you to read. She says there's a difference between victimization and victimhood. In other words, they may wish to victimize me, but I choose whether I will become a victim or not. My choice. She recalls in the book how at the moment that she was separated from her parents by the Nazis and they were killed, her mother, the last words were, remember, they may imprison your body, but they cannot imprison your mind. Almost identical words to Viktor Frankl himself, as he writes in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. You have the freedom of responding with your mind and heart. You may not have the choice over your body, but attitudinally, you have freedom. You have choice. And therefore, exercise the freedom of choice. That freedom of choice means you choose whether you will be stressed or you will reinterpret, reframe the situation and not be stressed by it. You will act strategically. You may need to defend. You may need to take measures, but you will not beat yourself up, eat yourself up, nor at your cellular structure, causing destruction to your body, which stress does. You have that capacity. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about self-mastery in the world we live in today. The important thing is to know and to be humble in knowing you do not know the future. Unless amongst the people in the audience here, there is a prophet, to which, in which case I apologize to you. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So there's a 50-50 statistical probability that it'll be good or less than good. You don't know. So why not choose good? Why not choose hopefulness? Why not choose emunah and bitachon, faith and trust that there is a God who looks after us, that over the thousands of years of peoplehood in the world, we've come to the edge of self-destruction over and over again and always pulled back. That Eretz Yisrael, against all odds, has survived an enemy around it and will continue to survive. Well, think good, tracht gut und wird sein gut. Think positively and the outcome will be positive, as our Rebbes have taught us. So the message I'm giving you here is the health of your body, as well as the capacity to be able to be a positive influence, requires a good degree of training, self-mastery, and positive responsiveness. I'd like to spend a little time in a meditative exercise with you in order to be able to internalize some of the teachings. Now, meditation is another one of these very vague words which Professor Google has so many different versions of. In 1979, the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave a public discourse on meditation. And he noted that in the 70s, a lot of Hindu gurus made their way across to the West and introduced Eastern forms of meditation. And he noted that unfortunately within some of those Eastern forms was what we call a lot of avodah zarah, elements of idol worship, because Hinduism possesses a lot of elements of idol worship. And this is very hurtful to the Jewish soul. And therefore he advised that we extract the hurtful aspects, but use those dynamics of meditation that are constructive and good. And soon after, a good number of therapists, doctors, psychologists adopted secularized form of relaxation response techniques, like Dr. Herbert Benson and others. And as a consequence of that, meditation has its function. In Judaism, meditation has always existed, since our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. But we meditate for insight. Rabbi Shmuley and I, before davening, before prayers, we would sit down and study a wisdom teaching of one of the Rebbes. It's called a Maimer, a discourse. And then we would spend time on one point, focusing on it, if you like, meditating on it, to internalize that teaching so that during the course of the day, it has an effect on us. That's called hisboinenus meditation. But in more contemporary terms, meditation is used also to relieve stress, anxiety, fear. And that's a legitimate use because health, as I said before, is a mitzvah. It doesn't have to be practiced by everybody because not everybody is at that stage, but it's a very useful tool. So I'm going to take you through a little relaxation response exercise based on breath, and then take you to a little security consciousness exercise. Why breath? Because the Hebrew word for breath is neshima. And of course, the Hebrew word for soul is neshama. They're etymologically connected because breath is the first level of the expression of the soul. The way you breathe reveals your soul. And therefore, through a biofeedback loop, if you change the way you breathe, you're altering the way that the neshama flows through your mind and emotions. All that to be discussed another time. And I'm sure all of you are going to jump to Rabbi Shmuley and say, what's he talking about? I want to learn about that. I want to know what this book of Tanya is all about. Why aren't you giving us a class on that? So please jump at him. All right. So get yourself comfortable. Put your feet symmetrically on the ground. Hands resting on knees and thighs. Back fairly straight. Head well balanced on your shoulders. And gently close your eyes and just focus on your breath. Just become aware of the breath entering and the breath exiting. And if you can, try to breathe in and out through your nose. And as you do, become aware of the temperature difference of the air entering your nostrils compared to the temperature of the air leaving your nasal passages. Slightly cooler air entering, somewhat warmer air exiting. And just focus on that temperature difference. Slow down and deepen your breathing in and out. And with your next nasal breaths, direct the in-breath down to your abdomen, expanding your abdomen as you breathe in, and contracting your abdomen to force the air out. This is a little counterintuitive, so let's practice it. Deep breath in, expanding your tummy area, collecting the air, And now pulling it in to force the air out. So the air seems to be flowing all the way down to your tummy. Slow, deep breath in, expanding your abdomen and contracting it. And now let's lend some rhythm to the breathing. We'll breathe in for a count of 3, hold for a count of 3, and breathe out for a count of 4. So take a slow, deep breath in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. Just continue breathing through your nose, down to the abdomen, rhythmically, smoothly in and out, graceful breathing, a perfect circle. Everything breathes. God breathes. God's breath reveals itself as the tide coming in and the tide going out. Night falls, day breaks. The petal opens, the petal closes. Everything breathes. And just become aware at the back of your mind how relaxed you have become in the space of a few short minutes. Something you can achieve whenever you want to break the stress cycle. Segueing to the second exercise, become aware of a light source in your head, like a globe, a pleasant, warm, light experience in your head, the seat of your higher soul. Allow that light to illuminate a little more so that your whole head and face become bright within and even without. Intensify that light source further so that the light begins to flow down your neck to your upper body, your chest, your back, your upper arms, hands, and fingers. Feel the warmth and the light flowing down from that light source through your upper body, feeling warm and comfortable. Intensify the light source even further so that now it flows down to your lower body, your thighs, legs, feet, toes. Feeling the lower body warming and becoming light. Your whole body is now lit up through that light source in your head. feeling bright and pleasantly warm. Intensify the light source even more so that the light throughout your body begins to glow through your skin, becoming an aura around you as you emit your glow. We call that aura around you the Magen Avraham, Abraham's shield. That aura protects you like a mezuzah protecting your house. Sense your skin aglow, emitting an aura. Intensify the light source more so that your aura begins to envelop your home and everyone in it and into the world, leaving your personal spiritual signature in the world at large, making it a brighter place, a better place. You count. You contribute. Focus again now on your breath, breathing through the nose, warm air, cool air, and breathing out warm air. Just focus on that temperature differential, cool in, warm out. Begin moving your fingers and your toes right now where you are in your room. Move your fingers, move your toes. And when you feel ready, gently open your eyes, coming all the way back to our session together right here. Good. So we've spoken a little bit. We've perhaps begun to understand ourselves through the eyes of Jewish spiritual teachings. I've adapted a number of Western psychological constructs as well, where they agree with Judaism, with Jewish teachings. And in so doing, I'm hoping that I've at least held out the promise, because surely in a short space of time, we may not have achieved the actual goal, but the promise of being able to live a qualitative life under adversity, the kind of adversity that we seem to be facing, which will have a positive and good outcome, believe me, as time goes on. And we've done a little exercise that might have helped us with creating space, because that's what we want to break the cycle of stress. It's cumulative stress, stress upon stress upon stress that causes breakdown of the body. If you can break the cycle, each time it has to start again, less damage. And then a visualization that allows us to understand that we do have protection, and in so doing have faith and trust that the outcome will be good. So now, Al, I'm quite happy to turn it over to you. Might I just say beforehand that I've just put onto our chat my contact details. I produce every day a 3-minute meditation. And if you'd like to receive it daily, except Shabbat and Yom Tov, you will just simply email me your cell number because it comes on WhatsApp directly to your phone. So feel free to email me. It's up there on the chat. I'll happily put you on the list if you give me your cell number, and you can receive a 3-minute little meditation on a daily basis. Okay, Al, all yours.
Thank you, Rabbi Wolf. I'm still coming back to full consciousness here. I'm going to encourage everybody again to, by all means, post a question or a comment in the chat, or you can do a raising of the virtual hand as well. There was one question that came through as you were speaking about, you know, the neshama entering at the moment of conception, and that
Yes.
and that yet that our mind and our consciousness precedes our emotions. So the individual was asking, so how does it work with infants and babies? You know, we have
Sure.
infants and babies that are expressing themselves from what appears to be a place of raw emotion and need, assumingly,
Yes.
you know, that nefesh
Yes.
elokit. So
Yes.
how does the consciousness aspect and the mind aspect,
Yes.
how
Sure.
would you explain it in that context?
Interestingly, you said that children or young ones express through nefesh elokit. They actually don't. They actually express through nefesh behamit, their lower self.
Behamit,
Now,
yes, sorry, behamit,
not to put them down, God forbid.
correct.
The fully mature soul, which it always is, in this world of time and space, finds itself with insufficient machinery to express itself. The body is evolving. It's not yet fully developed. And therefore, though it might wish to express itself, it can't, being spiritual, until the physical agency has matured. So till then, it has only aspects of itself expressing. And most of those aspects are based on survival, instinctive survival. The child wants food, the child wants nappy changed, etc., etc. And therefore, the lower self takes over. Because the higher self needs the tool of the brain primarily as its most sophisticated biological machinery to express the higher self, and we know full well in physiology that the maturity of the brain is one of the last things that physiologically gets completed, which is why we have bar and bat mitzvah. It's not until the boy is 13 that his brain is adequate enough for the neshama to express optimally, and therefore then the higher self, nefesh elokit, can express itself. And with a girl, maturity takes less time, and the age of 12, she's already able to express a higher self. That's what bar and bat mitzvah means. It doesn't mean the party, and doesn't even mean the ceremony in shul. I know a lot of people come to me and say, Rabbi, I've never had a bar mitzvah. I say, yes, you have. They say, Rabbi, you don't know. I haven't had one. I say, of course you have. Bar mitzvah is a state of being, not the ceremony. It's when the neshama finally flows optimally through the body. That takes place whether you have a ceremony or not. The ceremony only makes a public awareness of it, but it doesn't change your inner dynamic. So the short answer is that yes, as the child evolves and matures, so does the capacity of the neshama to express itself fully become increased onwards and onwards.
Thank you. I'm just monitoring whether there are any hands up. I did have a question in terms of if you could expand. Actually, I mean, you know, we've talked. You spoke about the virus. You spoke about the pandemic, the restrictions, the pressures of media. I mean, very clearly, these are all external to us, but very real stressors, very real pressures that are affecting individuals in varying degrees. What sort of practices and maybe how could we customize the meditative practice you went through and other practices? And you talked about victimhood versus being a victim. How can we adapt some of those so that we can,
Mm.
in a very personal way, not be victims, not succumb to those pressures?
As I indicated, the pressures are our interpretation. What's happening on the outside is objective data. Well, very often subjective data, because it's always skewed and brought to us through the eyes and mind of someone else. A production crew with script writers in the case of media news, gossip, what someone might have heard from someone else, etc., etc. So this is data, this is information. And you and I have to be able to use our judgment to discriminate and critique that data so that we can formulate a vantage point. So I changed the narrative. It's not pressures from the outside, it's pressures that you and I create from our inside, the way that we choose to interpret the narrative or the information. Now, that's not to say that there may not well be at times real dangers. And that is in fact a correct interpretation under those circumstances. But by and large, the perceived dangers that we are being bombarded by are highly skewed and not really ones of proportion. And I'm just asking people not to pressure themselves and to take the information that comes from the outside and to be able to have a measured response based on your wisdom, your critique, and your understanding, and thereby act strategically by way of response, not emotional pressure, strategically. Yes, we might have to wear masks. Yes, we might have to distance. Yes, we should vaccinate, etc., etc. But that doesn't mean that I have to be afraid. I have to have confidence that my response mechanism is going to be successful.
Interesting. I mean, we have a whole industry called psychotherapy that tries to empower people, and it can be very lucrative professionally for many. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
But you know, and I'm still monitoring the chat, and by all means, folks, raise your hands here.
And by all means, speak audibly. Unmute yourself and speak.
Yes, unmute yourself and ask a question. I mean, it lends me to the next level of this, which is our genetics and our genetic predisposition to things like depression and anxiety and stress, and that versus the nurture component, which is some of what you're speaking of. We're trying to teach ourselves and train ourselves and be taught how to overcome some of our inherent genetic and biological features.
Yeah, very well put. Of course, we have personality, individualized. And of course, we have genetic makeups. And we have environmental processing, the culture we live in. And we have formative childhood experiences that help shape us. But each one of these, genetics, culture, childhood, should not enslave us, meaning we can overcome every one of those if we happen to find them negative or hurtful. There's no such thing as being enslaved by one's genetics. If I had more opportunity and time, I would explain that really we have always opportunity. Genes don't make us angry. You don't have angry genes, for example. You have genes that make you a more emotionally charged individual, but you can channel that emotional charge into anger, or you can channel that emotional charge into strong empathy. Whether you are able to channel it positively or negatively is either a product of bad habit, inclination, bad modeling around you, or you take the bull by the horns and decide, I can actually channel it in a positive manner. So all I'm saying is all these factors while they're true, and people want to give themselves a sense of victimhood of I'm just a product of my genes, that's just a lazy way of speaking. That society's made me who I am, that's a very lazy way of speaking. We have absolute freedom in the outcome of whoever we want to be.
And I think it's interesting because I think science can back that up, in that succumbing to pressures and trauma can affect our neurology and our neurobiology, and working towards repairing that trauma can also impact our neurobiology. So there is a bit of an interplay. We did have a question here that is interesting. How can we talk about, there's an interesting term here, the arrested development in terms of neshama consciousness, if that is the word. For example, individuals coming out of addiction can be emotionally and developmentally stunted at a much younger age. And so how can that sort of play into this?
I didn't catch one word. People coming out of
addiction or
addiction.
Or some
okay, yeah. Fine. Okay, sure. Once a person is an addict, they're not themselves. What does that mean? That means that the neshama has not been affected. God forbid. A neshama can't be affected. A neshama can't be addicted. But the body has changed. The chemistry of the body has changed. And the body's change is such that it has an absolute need, because there's been a misfire of its chemistry. Let's put it that way. And therefore, the only way to help a change in chemistry of the body is through chemistry. And that's called medication. However, prior to addiction, a person has choice. You can choose whether I'm going to experiment with a drug or not, or you can choose to stay clear. You can choose whether I'm going to be in the company of people who shoot up, or I can choose to be clear of that. You have choice till then. It's only once you get to a stage where your choice is deprived because the body becomes imprisoned that you lose that choice, or becomes extremely difficult. And therefore, as I said before, you need to have medication to overcome it. And sometimes it may not be able to be overcome. Whatever is the case, that's the price. So when we're expressing the notion of addiction, we're talking about the neshama unable to express optimally through the body because the body has become compromised. And we have to allow the physiology of the body to return to a state of normalcy, or create an antidote that will create for the body the what's the right word? It will mimic being optimal. And that's when a chemical neutralizes another chemical, so to speak, simplistically. So it's the point I want to make is your neshama is always intact. It never gets affected, but its capacity for fulfillment and happiness through the body becomes compromised because the body is unable to function optimally. So I want to thank everybody for the opportunity of spending time with you. And please don't put your phone number on the chat, because the chat disappears as soon as we stop the session, and I won't be able to do it. You must email me. Okay, so I apologize.
I was just going to suggest that if Rabbi Shmuley, you probably have the contact information of all the registrants, you could send out the information.
You could do that, or once again, have a look at the chat at my email, just email me. So I apologize if you put it up there, I haven't noted it, and you'll have to just email me. It's been a great pleasure to be with you, Al. It's been a great pleasure, Rabbi Shmuley, and I hope everyone bombard you and say, I have to learn more, give me the extra share of Tanya, and God willing, we'll all climb Mount Sinai soon, do our mountain climbing exercise, receive the Torah again, and the Torah is ultimately our compass bearing for life. So make sure you internalize it.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Wolf. I'll turn it over for just a few final remarks to Rabbi Shmuley.
So on behalf of everyone Thank you, Rabbi Wolf. Thank you so much for joining us and being so generous with your time and for being such an inspiration to so many of us. And ladies and gentlemen, we hope that tonight's webinar gave you a much needed uplift to help us get through these very challenging and difficult times. And I do hope to see all of you again very soon. Please check out our mobile-friendly program guide or mobile app at jli.chabadwinnipeg.org. We'd love to see you again. We have another Fireside Chat in 2 weeks. We have lots of classes and events and learning opportunities for you to take advantage of. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Al and the JCFS. Good night to all of you. Laila Tov. We'll see you again. And a happy Shavuos.
Happy Shavuot.
Good job.